Hey, this is Natalie Zad, and before we dive into the commentary by my AI pals, who I call Max and Ava, I want to say a couple of things. So, what they're doing is that they are commenting on the most recent podcast I dropped, which is called When the River Took Over Stories Nearly Left Behind. This is Flower in the River podcast, number 91. And I like to include them whenever I can because they do a really good job. However, there's one thing that happens in terms of pronouncing one of the survivors' names. The survivor was Orvin Have, Havey. I'm assuming it was pronounced that way. However, my AI pals, smart though they are, they pronounce the name Have. So I just wanted you to know that. Thank you. Now I hope you enjoy their commentary. Take it away.
Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going back in time to 1915 Chicago.
Oh, the Eastland disaster.
Exactly. The Eastland disaster.
A real tragedy.
It is. Over 800 people died when that ship capsized.
Well, it was still docked.
Yeah. And that's what's so crazy about this one. It wasn't out on the open water.
Right.
So today we're diving into a couple of really obscure stories from that day.
Two very different perspectives.
Yeah. One man saw it all happen from a distance.
And the other...
He was right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
Fighting for his life.
And you know what's crazy? Both of their lives were totally changed by this event.
Oh, for sure. Okay, so first up, we've got E.J. Smith.
An engineer.
Yeah, he was actually in Chicago on business when the Eastland went down. Just happened to be there.
He wasn't a passenger or anything, just an observer drawn to the scene.
But being an engineer, he brought this, analytical mind to the whole thing.
That's right. Smith actually hired a motorboat to take him out to the wreckage.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine seeing that firsthand? Divers frantically searching for survivors?
And just bodies everywhere.
Hard to even fathom.
Yeah, his account is so vivid. And he talks about the makeshift morgues and this city just overrun with grief.
Just devastating.
It really brings home the human cost of it all.
It does. But what's so valuable about Smith's account are his insights into how it could have happened.
Right, because he's an engineer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's looking at this chaos, but he's also trying to figure out the mechanics of it all.
So what did he think caused it?
Well, first, he talks about the ship's design. It was known to be unstable.
Like tippy.
Yeah, tippy. And get this. They'd pumped out water ballast that morning to make room for more passengers.
What's water ballast?
Basically, it's heavy water stored in the ship's tanks to keep it stable.
Oh, like a counterweight.
Right. So by pumping it out, they made the Eastland way too top-heavy.
So it's much easier to capsize.
Exactly. And Smith goes on to critique the design of the hull, too.
The hull?
Yeah, the outer shell of the ship. He thinks it wasn't strong enough to handle all those passengers on the upper decks.
Ah, I see.
Which makes you think, right? Were there even safety regulations back then, or was this just a total system failure?
Yeah, good point.
Oh, and Smith mentioned something else interesting.
What's that?
He thinks two motorboats were racing on the river that day. And he says their waves might have made the Eastland even more unstable.
So it's like this horrible chain of events.
One leading to the next.
And then ultimately to this disaster.
It's tragic, but what's interesting is that Smith's story doesn't end there.
Oh. What happened?
Well, after the Eastland, he went back to his hometown in Arkansas and got involved in this paving commission movement.
Like roads and sidewalks.
Yep. It's almost like seeing this tragedy made him want to improve things, make his own community safer.
That's interesting.
Right. Like he went from observer to trying to prevent future disasters.
Makes sense.
But even then, things weren't easy for him. A few years later, there's a record of a fire at his house.
Oh, no.
And then, poof, in 1928, he disappears from the historical record completely.
Just gone.
It's wild, right? Makes you wonder if the Eastland haunted him.
Yeah, if he ever really escaped what he saw that day.
We may never know.
Okay, so we've got this engineer watching it all unfold from a distance.
Trying to make sense of it.
But our next story takes us right onto the Eastland itself.
This is Orvin Have. He was 21 years old and on the ship when it capsized.
So unlike Smith, he wasn't just watching.
He was living through it.
Wow. And thankfully, he wrote a letter home to his brother.
Describing everything.
It's raw, emotional. Like, you can almost feel what it was like to be trapped inside.
It gives you chills just thinking about it.
Yeah, just the panic, the feeling of being trapped below deck as the ship starts to go over.
The water rushing in.
And Have describes all of this, being surrounded by people screaming and praying.
The lights flickering, the sounds of the ship groaning.
It's just terrifying.
It really shows you how quickly things can change.
1 minute you're on a boat trip.
And the next, you're fighting for your life.
Absolutely. But you know what's amazing? Even in all that chaos, Have helped others.
Oh, yeah. Even while he's trying to survive himself.
He writes about rescuing over a dozen people.
Even a man with a broken leg.
It's incredible to think he could even think straight in that situation.
Shows incredible courage and compassion.
And there's this one part of the letter that's just heartbreaking.
Oh, tell me about it.
Describes pulling a man up onto the hull of the ship. He thought he'd saved him,
Oh, no.
but the man slipped and fell back into the water.
Into the propeller.
Yeah, it's just awful. 1 minute you're saving someone.
And next, they're gone.
And I can't even imagine the psychological impact of seeing that.
No, it must have been devastating.
But Have's ordeal isn't over yet. He goes on to describe the aftermath.
The morgue.
Yeah. He went to the makeshift morgue and saw rows and rows of bodies. It's difficult to even grasp the scale of it.
It really is. So here we have these two very different views of the same event. Smith trying to analyze the disaster.
And Have experiencing the terror firsthand.
Two very different perspectives, but both forever changed by what they saw.
And that's what we're going to dig into next. How the Eastland shaped the rest of their lives.
It's going to be fascinating.
Oh, for sure. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Eastland disaster.
It's incredible how these two stories, Smith and Have, really bring this event to life.
It's not just about the numbers.
Right. It's about the people.
Exactly. The ripple effect across their lives.
So let's talk about that. How did the Eastland shape them? Let's start with Orvin Have.
Okay. Remember how his letter captured the raw emotion of that day?
Yeah.
Well, it's his life after the Eastland that's really interesting.
Oh, yeah. He saved so many people on the ship. It makes you wonder if that's what led him to a life of service later on.
It's a good question. There's actually a lot of research on post-traumatic growth, like how people can change for the better after something terrible.
And that seems to be what happened with Have.
Yeah. He dedicated his life to helping others.
And not just for a little while. This was decades of service.
Absolutely. So after serving in World War I, he comes back to Madison.
Alongside his sister, who was a Red Cross nurse.
Right. And he builds this successful career as an electrical contractor.
A heavy electric company, right?
That's the one. Ran it for over 50 years.
But he didn't just focus on his business.
No way. He was super involved in all sorts of civic organizations.
Like the Dane County Red Cross, right?
He was the chairman.
Yeah.
And he even organized their very first blood drive.
Wow.
Oh, and he was also a charter director of the Park Bank of Madison.
So he was really invested in his community.
Yeah. The list of organizations he was a part of is huge. Rotary Club, Masonic Lodge, the Elks Club.
He was a busy guy.
He really believed in the power of community, working together to make things better.
It's like he took the lessons he learned from the Eastland. The importance of helping others, resilience, community.
And he applied it to his whole life.
That's pretty inspiring.
It is. To find purpose and meaning after all that loss.
Absolutely. And this is where things get interesting. Orvin was also a big ice boater.
Yeah, a bit of a surprise, right?
After everything he went through, it seems unexpected.
But it shows how complex people are. We can experience joy and sorrow.
Ambition and leisure.
Exactly. And for Orvin, ice boating wasn't just a hobby. It was a passion.
So tell me about this ice boat. What was it like?
This wasn't just any ice boat. It was a championship-class ice boat called the Mary B.
Named after his wife.
That's right. Picture this. A sleek, 39-foot-long vessel.
Wow.
Made of Sitka spruce.
Fancy.
Oh, yeah. And get this. It could go almost 100 miles per hour.
On ice. That's insane.
It was a marvel of engineering.
And it won a ton of races, right?
It did. It was a real champion.
It's so interesting how these two parts of his life, surviving the Eastland and building this amazing ice boat, are connected.
It shows a certain spirit, a drive to overcome challenges and find joy.
And you know what's even cooler? The Mary B is being restored right now.
I know. Can you imagine?
This piece of history connected to Orvin and the Eastland could be sailing again.
It's a beautiful tribute to his legacy.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about Orvin and his amazing life.
But what about E.J. Smith?
Right. The engineer who disappeared. Did you find anything more about what happened to him?
I wish I did. But his trail just goes cold after that note about him being ill.
So we're left with more questions than answers.
It's frustrating.
It is. It's like a historical mystery.
But even without knowing everything, we can still learn from his story.
That's true. What do you think about him getting involved in the paving commission after the Eastland?
It's fascinating. Like, he saw what happens when safety is ignored.
And he wanted to make his community better.
Maybe he saw connections between the ship's bad design and the need for good roads and infrastructure.
That makes sense.
And then there's that fire at his house a few years later.
Oh, yeah. That was scary.
Do you think it brought back the trauma of the Eastland?
Maybe? We can't know for sure.
But it definitely adds another layer to his story.
So we have Orvin Have, who dedicated his life to helping others.
And E.J. Smith, who maybe did the same in his own way.
Two very different paths, but both starting at the same tragedy.
And that's the point, right? History is about how events impact people's lives.
In ways we might not expect.
Exactly. And sometimes those individual stories are just as powerful as the big historical narratives.
For sure. It's wild how we went from this horrible disaster to talking about ice boats.
Right?
But that's the thing about these deep dives. You never know where they'll take you.
History is full of surprises.
It is. And, we often think of history as something that happened, like, way back when.
Something separate from our lives.
Yeah, but these stories, Smith and Have, they show how the past can really affect the present.
Totally. Like, think about Orvin Have. The people he saved, his community work, that ice boat being restored.
His legacy is huge.
It really is.
It shows that even after a tragedy, you can still find ways to grow and make a difference.
Yeah. It's a good reminder in today's world.
Right, when everything seems so chaotic.
It shows how resilient people can be.
And, I keep thinking about E.J. Smith. Yeah, we still don't know what happened to him.
It's like his story just ends with a question mark.
It's kind of unsettling.
It is. But sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that leave us wondering.
Makes you think, how many other stories are out there just waiting to be discovered?
Oh, I bet there are tons. Hidden in archives connected to events we think we know.
So, yeah, as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope you all learned something new.
About the Eastland, but also about the power of individual stories.
They really do bring history to life.
And they show us how resilient the human spirit can be.
So next time you're learning about history, don't just think about the facts and dates.
Imagine the people who lived through it.
Find their stories.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
Because in the end, history isn't just about the past.
It's about how we carry it with us.
Wow.